I'm Louisa Wilcox, and this is Grizzly Times, where we speak for the grizzly bear and the wild places it calls home. We introduce you to scientists, filmmakers, policy experts, and others who share their insights and experience speaking and working on behalf of the bear. At a time of unprecedented human-caused change, grizzlies depend on us more than ever. To learn more about what's happening and how you can help, subscribe to our newsletter at grizzlytimespodcast.org.
This is Louisa Wilcox with Grizzly Times, and I'm delighted to be here today with my friend Bruce Gordon. Bruce is a veteran pilot who has spent decades offering journalists, decision-makers, and citizens a bird's-eye view of threatened landscapes across the West. Since the 1980s, I've worked with Bruce on a host of campaigns to elevate the profile of special places, and I've seen the transformative impact that seeing the big picture can make. In one of my early experiences, Mike Sullivan, then governor of Wyoming, was inspired to protect the Clarks Fork of the Yellowstone River from being dammed after a single flight with Bruce. And Bruce also played a key role in a campaign that stopped a huge Canadian corporation from digging a massive gold mine on the doorstep of Yellowstone Park. So many politicians and reporters wanted to see what was at stake that Bruce took on the role of guide as well as pilot to free up a seat in his plane that would otherwise have been taken up by me or another local activist. And Bruce was critical to an ambitious project that involved flying all 23 mountain ranges in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem in a single summer to assess the health of the whitebark pine forests in the first ever study of how climate change was impacting this keystone tree species. The findings played a key role in litigation to protect Yellowstone grizzlies that depend on whitebark pine seeds for food, and they recently helped get the tree protected under the Endangered Species Act. I'm delighted to visit today with Bruce about his journey flying for conservation.
Well, it's a pleasure, Louisa. It's been amazing after seeing you up in Livingston when I landed doing some flights up there over the crazies, and we got to reconnect, and we've been chatting, and what a flood of wonderful memories come back, things you sort of forget about as you're moving on to the next issue or experience, and to think back on those wonderful days with you were really terrific. So thanks for the opportunity to chat with you, too.
Yeah, it's an honor. So, Bruce, you were born in Chicago and raised in Brooklyn. So how did you go from being a city kid in the East and Midwest to flying for conservation in the West?
Yeah, that's a good question. You posed it to me, and I have to reflect. I go, well, I used to be pretty good at stoop ball and stick ball in the city, and ended up going to college and changing everything I was doing. I was upstate New York, and I didn't give much thought to it at that time. But upstate New York was, for me, a pretty wild place, and I think it somehow imbibed in me a real appreciation for nature, something that was a lot different than stick ball for sure. So I don't know. It was just a sort of a fortuitous path that took me after the service, got drafted during the Vietnam conflict, and ended up after the service, doing a short stint of working in Wall Street for about 6 months. I said, boy, I can't deal with this, and going west. And something just sort of lured me out there, and got involved in being in the mountains and climbing and doing all kinds of wonderful things in the mountains and being a ski bum. But that didn't last long. I needed to do something else, so I got the VA bill to teach me to fly. And I learned to fly, and I'd been on mountain rescue, so I was going to combine flying with the mountains, and I was about to head off to Alaska to do flying for mountain rescue kind of issues, and met a guy named Michael Stewart, and sort of teamed up to do what we ended up calling conservation flying. Yeah,
so you founded EcoFlight with your friend, the musician John Denver, in 2002. But you'd done conservation flying decades before that. And in my estimation, all told, you've been flying to save special places for over 40 years. So, Bruce, what is it about getting people up in a plane that is so transformative?
Yeah, I learned that early on, that again, for me, combining my love of nature, and I'd been also volunteering with local schools, education, getting people in an airplane and showing them places that they've never seen before in a way that they've never seen it before was, as you said, transformative. People are sitting in that airplane, and for the most part, people are a little nervous, or even if they're not nervous, their senses are heightened. So they're thinking about what's going on. They're looking, and then by being able to explain what's going on to people, seeing how our ecosystems, our watersheds, how they're all connected, and trying to get people to understand not just the beauty that you're seeing, but also some of the concerns and problems. And we started combining that with some ground tours, and these aerial educational tours were born. And it was a way for people to get the big picture, try to understand what's really going on. And it was a very good way to communicate because people were listening. They were, when you were saying something. And then the idea being that, I certainly am not an expert on any of these issues or many of these issues, but I certainly know a lot, but I could steer people in the right direction. And for me, it's all about education. And these days, I'm saying I don't want people looking out the left side of the window, and I don't want them looking out the right side of the window. I want them looking at the earth, at the ground, thinking about what they care about, and then advocating for what they care about.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a transformative process being up in a plane with you. And I think I only threw up in your plane once, hopefully.
Yeah,
which is nothing to say about your skills. Oh, dear.
There was a campaign we did. We're doing oil and gas down here in Colorado over the Piceance Basin. And we flew everybody, every county commissioner, every mayor, everybody. And there was one lady, her name was Claire Bastable, and she was sort of reminded me of you. She was brilliant, and she could really express herself so well. And she hated flying. I mean, she couldn't stand it. Mm-hmm. But as so many people actually have been up in the air who know the land and act as guides sometimes, they get up in the air and they get airsick. They get sick, and they never stop, explaining and informing and educating the people. So, yeah, it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And again, I was talking about how, just being in the confines of the airplane, and it's exciting and it's beautiful and sometimes it's fearful. But there were times also when you get people up and they have these transformative experiences. And maybe because of the airplane, but mostly because of the landscape. So years ago, working on clear cutting, and people would go up who were loggers, and the issue, of course, was always jobs versus, conserving the landscape sometimes, logging. And they would say, oh, my God, I had no idea that so much of this land had been clear-cut. And it really opened their eyes, and it changed them in a transformative way. Same with these oil wells that I was referring to with Claire down here. People would say, oh, yeah, there's some wells. But then you take a look at the wells, and the wells are right next to the river, right next to the watersheds, in the heart of the watersheds. And the people who were really wanting to drill more and do more on the landscapes would say, well, wait a minute, maybe I need to pull back a little bit and be a little more conservative and conservation-oriented.
Right. I mean, I can speak to that with what happened with White Bark Pine. Thanks to you being in Jackson that day, we were having that educational program of the impacts to White Bark Pine from climate change and mountain pine beetles. And after this program, we got the Forest Service district ranger actually up in the air. And she knew that white bark pine were dying as a result of this beetle epidemic, and it was an unprecedented outbreak. But she had never seen the scale of it. And you got her up in the air, and she got down on the ground, and she said, I'm in. We are going to assess this ecosystem in terms of white bark pine damage. And thankfully, you had the time to do the overflights. But because we couldn't have done that project, that whole analysis, ecosystem-wide of white bark pine loss, if it hadn't been for your flight with Liz Davey, the Forest Service district ranger who was astonished at what was going on in the landscape. So similar to the loggers you flew and people interested in the oil and gas development, it really changes your understanding of what is happening and then your role in trying to address what's going on. So it's an amazing, amazing. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember that meeting and flying into Garden, I guess, and going up into you put this incredible meeting together that was so informative. Then Janie and I don't know if you remember this. Janie and I were then flying home, and we looked over and we saw a patch of red trees, way over there. And Janie took some incredible pictures, and then we sent it to some of your colleagues, and then we spent an awful lot of time trying to remember and see where they were. And it was one of the first really documented outbreaks that was so horrendous up there, and that picture went on to be sort of a poster child for a lot of that work we did.
Right. Well, that photograph that your partner, Jane Pargeter, took went around and around the entire Forest Service and conservation world before a Forest Service person actually figured out where that sea of red, those whitebark pine in process of dying, where that sea of red was, which was on the Bridger Teton Forest. But so it was this iconic photograph that was used throughout the campaign. This is what's going on. These trees are dying. You couldn't get that perspective from the ground. And so thank you, and thank Jane for all of that contribution, actually, to changing people's minds from seeing the actual. Yeah.
She's quite a photographer, so it's great to, when she's on board. She's also a pilot. She's my wife from South Africa, Jane Pargeter, and she, what we're doing, we'll talk about it in a little while, but some of the ideas she's coming up with and the educational aspects of what we're doing are still as exciting as ever.
Yeah. So along these lines, Bruce, you've flown with hundreds of environmental groups and in hundreds of places, from the little ones like the Yak Valley Forest Council of Montana to the big ones like Sierra Club and Natural Resources Defense Council. You've flown for everybody. Is there a campaign that stands out as just particularly meaningful, a story that you've carried with you?
Well, that's a tough question because there's been so many, and probably starting with the one when I was working with you, and I always remembered the annual meetings at GYC, and you were running them, and that was about the time when the New World Mine was going on, and flying everybody, and really for the first time realizing that you could fly so many different people, and they all have an impact, from the press, the political decision makers, the media representatives, the concerned citizens, you name it. We would fly everybody out of that little strip in Gardner, and it was challenging flying. It was exciting and fun, but the proximity of Yellowstone to that area made for a very compelling oversight and overview, and that to me, and to and winning the campaign. It was very exciting, and that, of course, gives extra emphasis to it. But through the years, just most recently, we were working very diligently on the Bears Ears, which is a monument for Native Americans had put down in southern Utah. And unfortunately, the Trump administration sort of changed things there, and we're hoping we're going to get back on board with that and reconfigure that monument again. Excuse me. Darn.
That's right.
So hopefully we're going to get back on board with, that monument and that campaign, which was great for us because I've been a member of the climbing community, so we could really help organize people from the climbing community and the Native Americans. Janie has really good connections with a lot of the tribes there. So we were really involved in that campaign right from the get-go. And, of course, it was devastating when the Trump administration rolled it back, but it was groundbreaking to have a first Native American monument, and it was very exciting, and we think it will be reestablished in its full capacity in the near future. And just when you talk about campaigns, a couple more come to mind. working over on the Snake River with dam removal, again with the tribes up in the Oregon area and the Idaho places where the mines and the tribes are working on getting those dams down. And again, what makes them memorable is when you win them. So it makes you feel very good about that. And then, we certainly do fly everywhere. And working with the Desert Protection Act also was a very meaningful campaign, working with so many different organizations, so many people that are really committed to change and positive change, and just the most wonderful characters that I first started meeting back, in those GYC Yellowstone days, which, so all those things pretty much stem from those beginnings when we were first starting to do conservation flying, and to now we're out there working with the tribal issues and campaigns just around here in Aspen, Colorado, where we finally retired a whole bunch of oil and gas leases, where I ended up flying, Governor Hickenlooper and Senator Udall and Senator Bennett and, you name every one of the county commissioners around here. So these campaigns that start off on the grassroots level and they end up really gaining momentum, and the images we can bring back and the advocacy we can propose from getting that view of the terrain and how it affects everybody is very fulfilling. I mean, that's what's, to me, interesting about what I do, or exciting for me and challenging, is that not only are you dealing with the issues of conservation and the aspects of the pros and cons of different landscapes or what to do about them, but then there's the flying aspect of it that you were interested in. And, you asked what particular incident. There's no real particular one, but in reflection, nowadays, if I'm flying into Jackson Hole, they have or a place like that, almost each airport has a weather reporting station. And back in the other days, most days, in the old days, we did not have that. So you would maybe go from a place coming up from the Green River Valley up into Jackson, and Jackson was reporting clear, and you would start up the valley over Hoback Junction, and all of a sudden you go, man, this is not even close to clear. And that was one of the first times I realized, some of these limitations of the new technology coming out, or no technology available for you. So flying, really had some difficulty, made the difficulty, of an airplane. And that day with Hoback Junction made me say, boy, I can't rely on this, and at any moment things can change, and I better really always keep doing my homework and keep doing the training as much as I can, because weather is unpredictable, and even though 20 miles away it's clear, it sure ain't right now, and this is mountain flying, and this was, many, many years ago, and you learn your lessons from that. But that stood out for me when you said what particular incident. I remember cruising up there feeling real good about the weather improving and everything's going to be great, and all of a sudden I'm, really concerned and having to go to Plan B and Plan C.
Right, yeah. So, so in hearing you talk about flying, across the West, I also am thinking about you're flying on several continents where the hazards really weren't just the weather, such as when you were down in Nicaragua documenting illegal logging, and then you were part of this crazy project called the Mega Transect that involves surveying 2,000 miles of country in the Congo Basin. With the renowned explorer and ecologist Michael Fay. So that was another level of challenge, I would assume. And were there times you weren't sure you were going to get out of there?
Oh gosh, sometimes I'm challenged to get out of the house here. Sometimes I wonder about that. But all that stuff goes into your mind for sure. And it's really cool for to listen to these questions, because it brings back a flood of memories. I said, God, I used to do that. I said, and nowadays I say, how the hell did I do that? But by the good grace of God go I, that's for sure. I'm just a real lucky guy in many ways. But, and you do your homework and you do your best, and you pays your money and you take your chances sometimes. But Yeah, those couple of places you just mentioned, whether it was into Central or South America or going across the Atlantic. I took a 206 across the Atlantic Ocean to get the plane over there to help support that crazy guy. I mean, I thought I was being crazy going across the Atlantic, but then I realized what he was doing walking across the Congo. And so the plane was used in support, and we didn't do a lot for that, but it was there, and I really admire people like Michael Fay who take on these huge challenges. But there were times in Central America too. I remember actually South America. Let's see if I remember this exactly. It was down in Ecuador, and they were cutting these manga lines, which there was demarcation lines because there was a huge calling for oil and gas, and the indigenous people were up in arms there. And in fact, at one time, it was a terrible mistake, but the indigenous people really hated the Conoco people, and a priest was coming in a Conoco helicopter. I don't know if you remember this. It was big news. A priest was coming in a Conoco helicopter to help make the peace and stuff, but the indigenous people thought he was a Conoco representative and ended up killing him. So it was all about, tempers were high. It was working on landscapes way down there. So, you really say, God, what am I getting myself involved in? This is pretty intense stuff. People are really concerned. And then on a local front, it comes to mind, makes me laugh almost, was doing a lot of flying for wolf reintroduction, and I was working with Diane Boyd up in the up in the Flathead, and that this was when I was first going up there, and so I'm going up with his biologist. He says he's been there before. I said, well, I've never landed on this little place. Diane had a little cabin on a dirt strip, and she was doing this remarkable research to bring in the wolf, because the wolf was coming across the Canadian border on its own, but people were talking about reintroduction and the pros and cons of that. And anyway, we're flying along, and I said, I don't know where this strip is. Are you sure you know where it is? And he says, oh, yeah, it's this little place, and I've been in there a couple of times, know just where it is. So we're flying along, and I'm trusting this guy, which was mistake number one, and then number two and number three. So I'm coming along, and I say, well, on the map it looks like it's about here. He says, no, it's over here. I'm sure it is, right there. So I see a clearing, and I say, boy, are you sure? He goes, yep, positive, no problem. So I circle around there. There was nothing on the map, and I judged it. I said, boy, that's pretty short. I don't know. He said, no, positive. And this guy flew in there. I said, well, if that guy flew in there, I can fly in there. So I come and I make an approach, and I think it's a good approach, and I go, no way, I'm not getting in there. I go around again, and the guy just is really upset now. He says, look, that you should be able to fly in there. I can blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I come in and I make this really great approach, and I land, and I come screeching to a halt at the edge of the tree line with a little creek beyond it, and I taxi back, and the guy goes, this sure doesn't look like the place, and he says, oh, I got the wrong place. And so here I am on this real little strip in the heat of the day, and I go, boy, I'm sort of stuck, and a guy drives by in a truck. He says, what the hell are you doing here? I said, well, we thought it was this airstrip. And he goes, well, I ain't seen somebody in this strip since 1958 or something. I said, well, great. So we got a couple of, I was saying, well, what am I going to do now? I'm in the middle of grizzly bear, wolf country.
Yeah, right.
I got an airplane. That's all I got. And we spent the whole day, clearing and cutting. We cut down some big trees and everything else, and waited till real late at night, and it was real cold, so the density altitude was okay, and we got out of there, and about a half a mile away was Diane's place.
Right. Well, speaking of planes, you've spent so much time in the cockpit, and and you have to know all the quirks of the different planes in such intimate detail. Do they, in the end, have personalities to you? I mean, do you give them names, and if so, do you have a favorite plane?
Well, my favorite plane is the one I still operate. That just getting a new engine, and the thing is like brand new, and it's a Cessna 210. It can go 200 miles an hour, and it, get you from one place to another. Whether it's Central America or reasonably.
Wow.
And you can also fly it at 70, 75 miles an hour. I fly it for mountain rescue up here, right on the edge. So it can go slow and fast. And there's so many planes. But we used to operate many when it first started was a Twin Otter. One of those high wing airplanes with the big wheels that could land on dirt strips, but real expensive to operate. But and naming airplanes, I guess I think many years ago named somebody gave us a generous donation. We put a nickname on the airplane, but I just I usually just refer to mine as One X-Ray Echo, which is sort of catchy, which is actually
that is catchy.
Call sign. Yeah, nobody
Great.
can pronounce it sometimes. Yeah, but it's it's a wonderful airplane.
So, Bruce, you were close friends with John Denver, with whom you shared a love of airplanes and the mountains in the West and saving special places. So what made your relationship with John so special? And if he were alive today, are there some things you'd like to talk about?
When you just said that, the first thing that comes to my mind was years ago we'd be sitting around and we were talking about John getting into politics, and he says, "Well, I can make more of a difference not being in politics." And I just thought of politics because if he was around today and saw what just happened yesterday with our country and at the Capitol building, the guy would have gone crazy because he was a guy that really cared. He cared about so many things, and we really connected. Years ago when I was climbing in the Himalayas, he was a big supporter of mine, and we would end up taking these long walks in Aspen or these different places around the world. I was one of the people that would travel with him once in a while who did not work for him, so we shared a lot of time in special places. One time in Mexico came to mind when you asked this question. Was we were just sitting out in the moonlight, just sitting out in the ocean and just hanging, and the waves are coming in, and we're looking at the moon and talking about the planet. And I don't know if many people know this, but John was very involved with NASA. He was a big supporter of NASA. And one special memory for me was taking off in his Learjet on his way down to Johnson Space Center, because he was going to take a look and talk to Goldman, I think that was his name, the director of NASA, because John wanted to go into space. And in fact, he was close to getting that honor, and the flight that they were talking about him going on was the one, unfortunately, with Christy McCauley that blew up. So John went over there, and I watched them do all these things with the astronauts, and it was really a heady time for me. But we shared our love of flying, of the mountains and the spirit of the mountains that was so well reflected in his music, and we had a sense of adventure. The guy coming back from Japan, a concert tour one time, we had a crazy old friend that would take us to these waterfalls on Maui, and then this guy could dive. He went up about 40 feet and did this dive into this pool. And next thing I know is old JD is walking up the same path, and he jumps off this thing and does this incredible swan dive. Hardly, almost like he'd been. And I guess he was quite a diver in his youth. And there was another aspect of this guy that you never seen before, but it was his care about the Earth and his care about the planet. And his proposal to NASA was, you get me up in this space, and I'll do a show. He really thought they could pay for some of this stuff, and he would beam down his music and sentiments down to the Earth, and then beam them out to the cosmos. So he was a dreamer. There was no doubt he was a dreamer. But on the other side, he was a practical guy. We actually used his Learjet to take the highest, the Premier of Canada up in British Columbia, and a whole gaggle of press and people like that over the Pacific Northwest when the spotted owl conflict was happening. So we boarded. First first he did a concert tour up in Canada, not a tour, a concert evening, because we had worked on the Tachincini. I don't know if you remember that campaign. Because
I do.
So there was we had done some flying up there in the Tachincini, and he was helping a fundraiser like that. And then I talked him into getting these dignitaries and flying over the Pacific Northwest. And so there we are in a Learjet with all his flaps out, flying at minimum speed with all these characters, and he's flying the plane and showing the clear cuts and all those other visuals that you see on that issue many, many years ago. But he was a wonderful man, just a regular, wonderful character.
Yeah. And so inspired about, with the notion that educating people across the country is important if we have any hope for conservation. And along those lines, he had, I guess, this vision of, the flight across America, which it sounds like you've taken up part of that in your work in Colorado with Jane, your colleague, involving students in Colorado. Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, we do at EcoFlight a program called Flight Across America, and I do it in the name of John Denver. And Jane really, was so influential in getting this program off the ground after a whole summer of flying almost every day, and then we direct our attentions to young adults. And John and I on the golf course once came up with this idea that we were going to fly an airplane from Alaska to Washington, D.C. on Earth Day 2000. And along the way, we were going to recruit different celebrity pilots to fly from place to place and then hold an evening of education, fundraising, whatever have you, a brouhaha, dog and pony show. And we had, we were starting conversations with Travolta, with Tom Cruise, with Harrison Ford, and we were trying to, see if this makes sense. And the idea was to end in Washington, D.C. on Earth Day. So it was just in the beginning of, planning and talking and everything else. And then John unfortunately met his demise on way too soon. And then I kept thinking, well, I'll keep doing this maybe in his memory, but nobody returned my calls. They returned John's in a second, but not mine.
Yeah.
And so we went on. I said, how can I honor his memory and do that? So I created a program where we would fly young adults over these different issues and have experts in conservation speak to them. And a lot of times it would culminate in these big meetings in the towns, whether it was Aspen or not. We'd have people from the whole Roaring Fork Valley come up, and we'd do presentations. The people that went on these this flight across America, and sometimes we'd have 4 airplanes filled with young adults and going from place to place, and we would end up having these big presentations at the end of them. And it was very exciting. We'd have speakers like Peter McBride from, National Geographic, and we'd have all kinds of experts come and talk to the community. So we were not only reaching the participants, we were tasking the participants, the young adults, to then go out and write editorials in their hometown papers and make their own presentations to more people. So we were reaching a lot of people. And it was very exciting because a lot of people went on to become leaders in the environmental movement, people that we had flown from Montana and people down from rural places in Arizona, too. So, it was around the country. We keep doing a facsimile of this program, but I feel very strongly that it's an important program. It also started when I watched flew Speaker Foley many years ago, House Speaker Foley. He fell asleep. I said, I can't just keep flying these politicians because they're politicians, period.
Right.
And so
it's too late for some of them. Yeah.
So it's looking at another addition and inspiration. It's an inspiration for us to fly these kids too. These guys. There's a process to get accepted. There's a process that they have to produce articles and other things. So it's a pretty good outreach, and it makes us feel really good. And Janie has been incredible, leading that charge.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, if there is a future, it is in, the kids you're taking up in the air, involving in these programs. I mean, if they undertake in a motivated way saving this planet, we will have a hope. So, thanks for that. Yeah, you mentioned climbing a bit ago, Bruce, and I remember over the years that when we would get together, we'd often talk about climbing and mountaineering because it's a shared interest. I'm not your level by any stretch, but what do you think, Bruce, are aspects of flying and climbing? I mean, are they similar or different for you? Because you mentioned them back and forth. You're interested in climbing, you're interested in flying.
Yeah, I think they are very similar. I think it creates, years ago when I would teach climbing, the best thing about it was you have one guy, someone belaying someone else, and there's a sort of a commitment about the rope, and there's a camaraderie, but it all comes from an awareness, thinking about the other person, so that So that involves other people, whereas flying, you may not be involving other people or relying on other people. So that's a difference, that, relying on yourself in many instances. But it's an awareness. It opens up your consciousness. You have to be thinking about so many different aspects. Weather is always an aspect about it. How are you feeling personally? What do you need to know technically? Sometimes with airplanes, there's a little more that you have to think about, and you need a backup plan. But I think the most important thing is an awareness, and it's a self-awareness that is a common denominator there. Where you're at, what are your capabilities? What are my intentions, and the decision making. Decision making is really important. Many years ago, and you probably remember this. I know you were involved with Knowles. I can't remember exactly what way, but it was the 5 P's that they teach. Prior planning prevents poor performance.
Poor performance.
Yeah, and that to me is another similarity that you really have to do with climbing and with flying. But again, the mindfulness and the awareness of who you are, where you are, what you're going to do here is a common denominator.
Listening to you talk about climbing and flying in that way, it reminds me about what it's like to be in grizzly bear habitat. Where you have to be completely present. You can't be distracted, or on your iPhone or what have you. You have to be listening to the crack of a twig, the sight of ravens that might signal a carcass. I mean, you can't be somewhere else. And I think that gives us those experiences give us something closer to, maybe our original self, that we can be present. We don't have to be distracted on social media, and we may be wiser for it, actually. But,
well, that is really beautiful. That's what I was trying to say. That's so beautifully said, though. Being our original self, and your senses, etc., are heightened by those experiences. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, Bruce, Aspen a few times, where you've lived since the 1970s, and I know you've seen dramatic changes in the human landscape. All of us have, who've lived in the West for any length of time. But you've also had a bird's eye view of the changes. How have the changes in the West affected you? Yeah,
well, they've galvanized me for many, many years as I see things that are changing that I don't feel, are what I would like. But I recognize that what I would like is not certainly what everyone would like. But that's been part of my job is to put these changes out in front of people and say, is this what you want, or is this what you not want? Here in Aspen, it's amazing how, when I drive down the streets now, even with the pandemic, the people are still here. It's busy, it's crowded, the buildings are busier. But what bothers me the most is when people come here, and especially this last year or so, they've come here in droves and relocated here and are, getting on, changing the school board and different aspects of, a little faster than I would like to see. And that's just my own personal opinion, of course. But what I see them doing is instead of inhaling where they are, they're exhaling where they've been. And I find that, and those changes are just not why I came here, and it's just happened a little too fast, a little too many people, and I think we see that all over our country. But as far as the environment's concerned, the air when I used to fly in southern Utah was crystal clear blue, and it's just not like that anymore. The untrammeled backcountry all of a sudden has a mining claim in the middle of it. Or some other area that people have gotten some exclusions or are building some project there. The Lake Powell, you look at, and this is, of course, climate change, not so much about people, or maybe there's a lot of people taking more water all the time, but the bathtub rings on Lake Powell are really discernible, just incredible. The red dust, there's a red dust phenomenon that's going on in the wintertime here, or in the spring, where all of the changes in Utah and the drilling and the mining, etc., is creating vast dust bowl situations, and the wind blows from the west, and all of a sudden you find layers of red dust up here in the mountains, which is greatly increasing the runoffs, the timing of the runoffs, and increasing avalanche hazards. So does that have to do just with people? You can make an argument that it does. But there's been a lot of changes like that. And, just looking at the pollution, we have some incredible images of shiprock, this incredible monolith out in near the Four Corners area. And, the smog from the power plants, et cetera, from there, you could hardly even see the darn thing sometimes. So, it's more people upon the land, as John's song would always say. And so those are things that I'm, hopefully some of the images and the work that we've done with so many, committed conservation organizations, and we fly for over 300 of them, we're all working to get people to understand the challenges and try to address them appropriately.
Yeah. So, Bruce, you mentioned a minute ago the pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic has obviously been just devastating for all of us, but nobody's been hit harder than indigenous people, especially, including tribal people in this country. And this spring you led an effort involving pilots who were friends of yours, to deliver by air 250,000 PPEs to 5 different tribes at a time they were in desperate need. What are your most vivid memories of that experience?
The first thing that comes to mind are the FedEx trucks. Janie did this. Janie did this. We have Dion Bent is a board member of one of the leaders of the Navajo Nation down there, and he's one of our board members. And we've done a lot of work. Dion Bent is his name, and so Janie, in chatting with him and other people. And talking with one of the foundations that supports us, trying to figure out what was going on, trying to get an idea, lay of the land. Janie was talking about different conservation needs for the tribes, and then we found out that one of the foundations was trying to get materials to the tribes, and there was this incredible convoluted hoops they had to jump through, going to the communities. And Dion said, hey, this is not working. The people are not getting these PPEs, which are so important. Nobody's getting it. So Janie said, well, look, we can do this. We can get these supplies to these remote areas, and what you need to do, Foundation, please, is get us the material. And then Janie said to the leaders that she knew and worked with on conservation issues, we're going to get this material. Now you figure out, how many goes to where, goes to what. And we dealt with 5 different tribes, which is in itself a challenge. We landed on 6 or 7 landing strips, and we delivered this material. But I said the FedEx trucks because I thought at first, okay, we'll get some material and I'll repackage them and I'll put them in plastic bags and I'll fill my Cessna up and I'll make 2 or 3 trips to a couple places. But we got 250,000 of these PPEs. And what is 250,000? Well, it's these two huge FedEx trucks. And so then we said, what the heck are we going to do with this? And got some volunteers, and Atlantic Aviation let us use a hangar, and we boxed them up. We figured it out where it was going to go. And then I said, well, if I do the flying, it's going to take me a month. So I went down the flight line, and these incredible characters in Aspen. I mean, these guys are so talented, and we had about 10 airplanes. And we actually produced a video on this, which is pretty cool, and you can see all the airplanes taken off in a very loose formation, spreading out, going to these different 5 airstrips, doing 2 or 3 trips. And we unloaded this, and it was a very, very timely work that we did because, as you said, it really was hitting the indigenous folks and Native Americans very, very hard at the time.
Yeah. Well, thank you. What an immense, what a great contribution, and thanks to your friends who pitched in, and pilot friends as well. So flying during the pandemic has posed a whole new set of problems for you, obviously. But you've taken to offering virtual flights with your GoPro camera, and you've been sleeping under the wing of your plane to avoid motels. What has been the most challenging and perhaps rewarding about these innovations that you've crafted with Jane to overcome constraints imposed by the pandemic and connect with people?
Well, yeah, again, my little sense of humor or whatever, the answer to that is GoPro batteries. And the GoPro batteries, they were the most challenging, and it turned out to create the most rewarding experiences in many ways. Yeah, the GoPro batteries only worked about 40 minutes. And so when we came up with the idea of offering virtual aerial educational tours, we were going to use GoPros. And so it captures some really good images. We have a talented video guy that works with us. So we go out and capture the images. We bring them back. Our video guy edits them. And then we work with the conservation organizations that are working on these specific issues. Everything from the Gallatin National Forest plan up there, outside near you, up in Bozeman, to the Crazy Mountains, to I spent all summer doing these things. Everything from the fires of California to just last week or so to about 3 weeks ago, some mining issues down in with Roger Featherstone down, and so you create these virtual tours, and they can be used for a myriad of uses. You can use them for talking to various stakeholders and educating them on the issue. Or what I really like is when we get them out to the press and they get on the TV, and there's discussions about them, and they some of them even went down. We did this one virtual tour outside here in North Park near Walden and Steamboat, Colorado, and the next couple of days we responded quickly. We got them to a meeting of the Commission on Oil and Gas, and something to do with the methane flaring. So our tours were used for that. So they can be very impactful, and they can be very long-lasting and all educational. But again, so the idea, though, is getting these GoPros to capture what you want. And sometimes the issue does not, go along with where they are compared to where an airport is. So you have all these logistical issues. How much fuel do I have, et cetera? So we got to finding these little airstrips, which I hadn't been in for years and years and years. So I would go into these little airstrips, and I'd land, and I'd sleep at them for the night, like you said. And so that was really rewarding. I mean, being out, and it was back to camping days and really fun for me in many ways, although it was challenging. And get up early in the morning and then fly the GoPros over the issue, and then, always working hard to have the right weight and balance for these small airstrips, which challenged my pilot skills. And then, being out camping at night, and that was it was. Janie would come with me. It was romantic sometimes. It was just a nice way to do it, although it was difficult sometimes. But the stuff we've produced, we're very proud of. These virtual aerial educational tours, I think, are pretty well done, and the organizations we work with are, comment and advocate and educate about these particular issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bruce, it's common for pilots and astronauts to describe spiritual experiences when they're up in the air in space. Have you had any experiences you might define as magical or mystical? And also, why do you think that flying in a plane thousands of feet or hundreds of feet up in the air or seeing Earth from space can be spiritual?
Wow. Again, maybe because we talked about John earlier in this thing, one kind of mystical kind of experience was that, as I referred to earlier, we were on our way in his Learjet to Houston, and we took off at night, and all of a sudden we saw a light way to the right, and we're flying along dead night, and it's hard to describe flying at night. It's just really beautiful and quiet, and you feel like you are up in space, especially in that kind of airplane. And we saw a light, and the pilots, and I was up in the cockpit, and the pilot, John's pilot, was there too, and he says, "What is that light?" And we both didn't know what it was, and we talked to ATC, Air Traffic Control, and they say, we're not painting anything out there. We don't have any radar out there. And all of a sudden, over the radio, you would hear, "Hey, what's that light at 2 o'clock?" or "What's that light at 4 o'clock?" And so all these different aircraft were reporting this light. So, we all get into our, especially John gets into this, spiritual, mystical, thing, flying saucers and, outer space and the cosmos. And it was pretty intense, and really, I don't know what to say, mystical. You just didn't, you say, boy, what are the possibilities? What is there out there? And it reminds me also of, again, with John, he had a friend who I became very good friends with, named Bonnie Dunbar, who was an astronaut and up in the space shuttle, and she was up here doing some mountain flying. She could fly T-38s, these jets, back and forth. But she was pretty inexperienced with small planes, and she was going back to Spokane, where her parents lived, in a small plane, and she had to cross the Rockies. So she stopped in to visit with me, and we did some mountain flying, helped her out with at least getting across her route. But I remember one night in particular, we were sitting in the cabin and looking at the picture that she has seen so often. It was on Time magazine. It was Earth was the person of the year at that time. That picture of Earth from outer space, and she had seen that. And it just was a feeling of that you're such a small part of the cosmos. You're just you're existing on a different plane, and I feel that way in an airplane sometimes. I'm flying above it, and I'm. Janie said it really well, because I knew you might pose this kind of a question. She says, she feels that she's in an entirely different dimension and part of the ether, not part of the world, just sort of above it, watching as an observer. And it reminded me, I guess, when I first came to Colorado, all those, to go all the way back to what you said, when a city guy, came back out to the mountains and sleeping under the stars, as I did when I was first learning to climb and things. And I'd look at those stars, and people would say, some of those stars went out, millenniums ago or whatever. So what is real? Where are you at with this? It's a what is the spirit of it all? And you feel that spirit in the mountains, especially heightened, like you shared so eloquently about when you're out there with the grizzly bear or walking around in the woods. And I feel like that a lot when I'm up in the air, many times by myself, just looking at the world and the planet, and just being very grateful to be able to think and feel, what life really is.
Wow. Well, Bruce, this has been an honor and a treat. Thank you so much. This is Louisa Wilcox with Grizzly Times, here with pilot Bruce Gordon. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about the Grizzly and what you can do to help, subscribe to our newsletter at grizzlytimespodcast.org. And if you can, give us a review.